57 stab wounds, right before the pregnant queen's eyes. His scream was buried in the walls that were meant to protect her. The conspiracy was led by her own husband. He personally held the queen while the murderers did their work. His dagger was intentionally left in the wound. It was proof. 4.5 centuries later, millions of tourists pay to see that bloodstain on the floor. You pay to see the traces of a brutal murder from 1566. But the most terrifying thing about this story isn't the blood. The most terrifying thing is the lie that this entire palace is still built on. And today, I will show you how a stain that no longer exists became immortal, and why the real murderer in this story is not a person at all. It smells of museum wax and cold stone. The air is still, filtered of life, thickened by centuries of silence. The echo of footsteps on the polished parquet is the only sound these walls allow themselves not to absorb. The footsteps of tourists. They move slowly, respectfully, as if through a cemetery. Their voices are a muffled whisper, as if they're afraid of waking someone who has been asleep for a very, very long time. They are all looking for the same thing. They walk past tapestries woven from gold and patience, past portraits of kings whose eyes, dead from oil and time, watch you from the gloom. They are not looking for grandeur. They came for blood. There it is, an unremarkable dark stain on the oak floorboards, cordoned off by a velvet rope. The plaque lies, calling it a trace of a tragedy. This is not a trace. It's merchandise, a legend that you pay for at the entrance. 57 stab wounds, dealt 4.5 centuries ago, are still selling tickets. A woman reads a guidebook to her husband in a low voice. Her words, thin as a spider's web, cling to the silence. They say it could never be washed out. But that's a lie. The floor has been replaced. More than once. Wood rots. But a story doesn't. A story seeps in deeper than any blood. This place is the palace of Holyroodhouse. But is it a palace? Or an artfully draped mausoleum? The throne room is empty. The seat of power is just an exhibit. No one rules here. Here, they remember how power was lost. The Great Gallery, 111 custom-painted ghosts, marching along the walls in an endless procession. A dynasty created by an artist's brush to prove the right to a throne that has long since gone cold. This is not a home. It's a stage. A frozen set for one. Main play. Step out into the courtyard. Listen. The wind that wanders through the ruins of the abbey sounds different. It is a skeleton fused to the palace's body. Bare arches, like the ribs of a long-dead giant, pierce the gray Scottish sky. This is where it all began, with prayer, with a piety that turned out to be incredibly profitable. The stones that were meant to lead to God became the foundation for a throne. And now, only the broken teeth of walls remain, a wound the palace could never hide. This building isn't standing, it's observing. It inhales the whispers of tourists and exhales cold. It remembers the warmth of living bodies in its rooms, the clinking of goblets, the scratching of quills signing death warrants. It remembers the scream of the pregnant queen and the grating of a dagger on bone. This palace is not a silent guardian. It is the main participant, an accomplice, a weapon. It is a cage of gilded stone built for protection, but which became the perfect trap. Its corridors were designed for processions, but they proved ideal for conspiracies. Its walls were supposed to muffle the noise of the street, but instead, they buried screams within them. We think we are looking at it, but it is looking at us, with the arrogant patience of one who has seen kings be born and die, who has seen ambitions turn to dust and tragedy turn to immortality. It waits. It always waits. And now, it is ready to talk. Not the story written in the guidebooks, but the one that is baked into its mortar. The story of how walls are built, of gold, fear, and human bones. Every foundation begins with a lie, a beautiful, necessary lie to hide the first, dirtiest stone. Legend has it that in the year 1128, King David I was hunting in the forests at the foot of Arthur's seat. In the thick fog, he became separated from his entourage. And then, out of the thicket, emerged a great white stag, with antlers like a crown of thorns. The king's horse reared up, and the beast charged the defenseless rider. David, preparing for death, offered a prayer. And in that instant, a light flared between the stag's antlers, revealing a shining cross. The stag retreated and vanished into the forest. That very night, an angel appeared to the king in a dream, commanding him to found an abbey on that very spot in honor of the Holy Cross, a Holyrood, a beautiful tale for pilgrims, a convenient excuse for a massive land grab. David was no saint, he was a strategist. He granted the Augustinian monks thousands of acres of the finest land. He didn't just give them a place to pray, he handed them the key to the treasury. The abbey grew out of the ground slowly, inexorably, sinking its roots into every wallet in the kingdom. The monks were given the right to collect a tithe, a tenth of the income from everyone, including the soldiers at Edinburgh Castle. They were granted a monopoly on trade in their own district, turning the Canongate into their personal free economic zone. Their piety was measured in tons of wool and barrels of wine. Their prayers were paid for with customs duties. The abbey's treasury swelled. It was a business, and God was their silent partner. 400 years later, another king enters the stage, James V, cruel, suspicious, with the eyes of a hunted wolf. He looks at the wealth of the church and sees not God's grace. He sees a resource. Europe is in the fever grip of the Reformation. Faith is cracking at the seams. And James, a genius of cynicism, places his bet. He sends a letter to the Pope, a letter written not with ink, but with pure blackmail. Its essence is simple: pay up, or my Scotland becomes Protestant. He twists the arm of God's vicar on earth, threatening heresy in exchange for cash. And the Pope pays. He allows James to tax all the clergy, £10,000 a year. A river of gold flows from Rome to Edinburgh, straight to the construction site of the new palace. But even that is not enough. The palace demands more. Wives are also an asset. The first, Madeleine of Valois, a fragile French princess, brings a dowry of 100,000 écus to Scotland. She dies 6 months later, unable to withstand the damp Scottish air. Her money remains. It is already turned into cold, grey stone. The second wife, Mary of Guise, is stronger, more cunning. Her dowry is even larger, 150,000 livres. This French gold becomes the mortar that binds the Scottish stones. Every block in the famous James V Tower was bought with foreign currency and the health of his wives. But even the dowries of 2 queens are not enough. Ambition demands one final bloody sacrifice. His name is Sir James Hamilton, architect, aristocrat, a distant relative of the king. Too influential, too rich. He is accused of treason. Treason, a convenient word to hide envy and greed. The trial is a farce. The verdict is known in advance. Execution. The executioner's axe falls quickly, and even more quickly, the royal treasurers confiscate Hamilton's entire fortune. His lands, his castles, his gold. The blood is not yet dry on the scaffold, yet his money is already paying the masons finishing the palace tower. The foundation is laid. It rests on a saint's vision, on the cunning of monks, on the fear of the Pope, on a dead princess's dowry, and on the beheaded body of a royal cousin. Holyroodhouse was not built on holy ground. It was built on a deal. And the price of that deal was paid in full, with gold and with bones. Architecture is a confession in stone, a way to speak of your fears without uttering a single word. You just need to know how to read blueprints the way you read another's soul. It all began with an inferiority complex. At the very beginning of the 16th century, James IV looks south, towards England, and sees the Tudor court, rich, modern, arrogant. And what does he have? Grim castles, built for war, not for receptions. He builds the first palace at Holyrood not for himself. He builds it for the eyes of his father-in-law, the King of England. It is an architectural scream. We are not savages. We are Europe too. Every arch, every stained glass window is an attempt to spite the English. It is the vanity of an entire nation, frozen in limestone. But the real psychoanalysis begins with his son, James V. He trusts no one. His court is teeming with lords whose smiles are as sharp as daggers. He doesn't build a palace. He builds a refuge. His famous tower, the only thing to survive the centuries, is not a declaration of greatness. It is a manifesto of paranoia. Look at it. It is asymmetrical. It is defiantly different from everything that would be built later. The walls are almost 2 meters thick. That's not for warmth. That's from fear. The windows are narrow arrow slits, barely letting in light. It's impossible to shoot a crossbow through them from the street. The rooms inside are small, almost cramped. They are not designed for lavish balls. They are made for secret meetings, for whispers in the twilight. And the staircases, secret spiral staircases, hidden in the thickness of the walls. They don't lead to the staterooms, but directly to the king's private chambers, so he could appear and disappear, bypassing the eyes of his courtiers, so no one would know where he was from 1 minute to the next. This tower is not a home for a monarch. It is a burrow, a perfectly designed cage in which the king locked himself to protect himself from a world that wanted to devour him. A century passes, a century of civil war, blood, and chaos. The monarchy was beheaded and then resurrected. Charles II ascends to the throne, and he needs something more than a refuge. He needs propaganda. He demolishes almost all the old buildings. He orders his architect, Sir William Bruce, to create something new. And Bruce creates a masterpiece of architectural deception. He takes the surviving tower of the paranoid James and, as if mocking it, builds an exact copy opposite it. He creates an illusion of symmetry. He forcibly inscribes old fear into a new, rational era. The palace now looks out at the world with 2 identical eyes. Look at the inner courtyard. It is a triumph of order, a perfect square. Classical colonnades built with mathematical precision. The Doric order on the bottom, Ionic in the middle, Corinthian on top. This is not Scotland. This is Rome. This is Greece. This is the language of empire, the language of absolute power. This is architecture that screams, the chaos is over. There are no more accidents. There is only the will of the king. Every stone is laid in its place. Every line is precise. It is a visual command, a statement that monarchy is harmony and all else is ugly disarray. And so, the ego of each ruler was frozen in stone. The complexes of James IV, the paranoia of James V, and the cold, calculating absolutism of Charles II. Holyrood is not one building. It is 3 neuroses, 3 manias, 3 wills to power, fused into a single, silent monolith. To understand it, you don't need to look at the coats of arms. You need to place your hand on its walls and feel the fear. Greatness is not bestowed, it is conquered. From fire, from time, from human greed. Building a palace is not a peaceful process. It is a war where hammers replace swords, and the enemy army is reality itself. The year is 1544. The English King Henry VIII is furious. The Scots have refused to marry their young queen, Mary, to his son. He sends an army north with a simple and brutal order: put all to fire and sword. The Earl of Hertford follows it literally. Edinburgh burns. English soldiers storm Holyrood. They don't loot, they destroy. Torches are thrown at tapestries, at carved panels, at the Royal Library. The fire devours the wood, licks the stone, blackens the sky. In a few hours, the palace of James IV, that architectural slap in England's face, is turned into a blackened skeleton. Of all its splendor, only one thing remains: the tower, the fortress of James V. The walls built from fear proved stronger than the walls built from vanity. The Scots look upon the ashes, and gritting their teeth, they begin again. They rebuild their palace, stone by stone. It is an act not so much of restoration as of defiance. Each new block is a silent answer to the English fire. 130 years pass. A new war. This time with their own lords. King Charles II, sitting safely in London, dreams of a new, magnificent Holyrood. His architect, Sir William Bruce, stands on the construction site in Edinburgh and fights a battle that cannot be won with force of arms. A battle with Parliament. The Scottish nobility sabotages the project. Why spend £30,000 on a royal whim when that money could be put in their own pockets? The funding dries up. The workers stand idle. Bruce writes furious letters, pleads, threatens. He isn't fighting with stone and mortar. He is fighting apathy and theft. Every cornice, every column in his perfect classical palace is the result not of inspiration, but of an exhausting bureaucratic war. And within these rising walls, another battle is being fought. A battle against time. The Dutch painter Jacob de Wet receives an impossible commission: to paint 111 portraits of Scottish kings. From the mythical Fergus, who ruled 330 years before the birth of Christ, to the currently reigning James VII. And it must be done quickly. De Wet locks himself in his workshop. This is not creation. It is an assembly line. He must create a dynasty on canvas. He works like a man possessed, for 2 years. In 2 years, he paints 97 portraits. The faces of most of the kings he simply invents. Celtic chieftains with 17th century mustaches. Medieval monarchs in Roman togas. It is a factory for manufacturing the past. The Great Gallery is not a historical chronicle. It is an act of desperation, an attempt to prove the antiquity of a lineage that, perhaps, never even existed. Every stroke of De Wet's brush is a second stolen from oblivion. Every report from Bruce to Parliament is a coin snatched from the hands of embezzlers. Every stone raised from the ruins after the English fire is a fragment of pride, turned into a wall. The greatness of Holyrood was not born in the silence of royal chambers. It was born in the roar of battles, with fire, with enemies, with their own subjects. These are scars, turned into architecture, a monument not to triumph, but to overcoming. The palace is complete. The stone has cooled. Now comes the time of people, and the time of the poison they bring with them. In 1561, an 18-year-old widow moves into Holyrood. Her name is Mary Stuart. She is the Queen of Scotland, but her heart, her language, her soul have remained in France. She tries to recreate a little Versailles within these grim walls. The sounds of the lute, the rustle of silk, quiet readings of Petrarch. She brings poets, musicians, books with her. She tries to light a candle of the French Renaissance in the raw Scottish mist. But the walls are oppressive. They do not answer her. They hear another sound, the grating voice of John Knox, the prophet of Protestant fury. He comes to the palace again and again, not as a subject to his queen, as a judge to a sinner. Their meetings are verbal duels. He stands before her, black, gaunt, his beard trembling with anger. He brands her masses idolatry, her dances debauchery, her very self a Jezebel. She, raised in the most refined court in Europe, tries to answer him with logic, with law, with tears. But his faith is deaf. He does not want dialogue. He wants her to surrender. The palace becomes an arena where two worlds collide, and these walls are the only witnesses to a battle that Mary is already beginning to lose. She seeks salvation in marriage. Her choice is her cousin, Lord Darnley. Handsome, tall, empty. Their wedding at Holyrood is not a celebration of love. It is a feast full of bad omens. Humiliation is served as the main course. Mary denies her husband, the crown consort, the right to be king on equal terms with her. At the wedding banquet, she sits alone at the head of the table. Darnley, drunk and insulted, sits on the side, among the lords. Even then, to the sound of music and the clinking of goblets, the palace is turning into a trap. The climax comes on the 9th of March, 1566, a cold, damp evening. Mary, 6 months pregnant, is having supper in her tiny chamber in James Fee's tower. With her are a few of her closest confidants. Among them is David Rizzio, her private secretary, an Italian, a foreigner, a Catholic. He is intelligent, talented, and he is the only one she trusts. And below, in the darkness, her husband, Lord Darnley, leads a group of conspirators. About 80 men. They infiltrate the palace. The main group ascends the secret spiral staircase, the very one Mary's grandfather built for his own safety. The architecture of fear now serves as a tool of betrayal. The door bursts open. Armed men storm into the room. Their faces are contorted with hatred and whiskey. At their head is Lord Ruthven, pale as death, having just risen from his sickbed. He demands they hand over Rizzio. Mary leaps up, trying to shield her secretary. At that moment, Darnley enters the room and grabs his wife. He holds her against him, preventing her from moving. Rizzio clutches at her dress, his cry in Italian drowned out by the roar of the conspirators. Justice! Justitia! They drag him away. They haul him out of the small, intimate supper room and into the adjacent, vast and cold outer chamber. And there, just a few meters from the pregnant queen, they butcher him. 56 or 57 knife wounds. The daggers enter the body again and again. Lord Darnley leaves his own dagger planted in the wound, so that everyone knows who gave the order. This is not just a murder. This is an execution, a political message written in blood on the palace floor. Mary is locked in her chambers. The palace, her home, her fortress, has overnight become her prison. She hears the screams, the groans, the triumphant shouts of the assassins. She is a captive in a gilded cage, and she realizes this place is no stage for balls. It is a slaughterhouse. A fracture in a building does not begin in the stone. It begins in the soul of the one who lives there. The murder of Rizzio was not simply the killing of a secretary. It was a dagger plunged into the heart of Mary herself. It did not kill her. It broke her. She sits in her chambers, a prisoner. Outside, the clang of her enemy's weapons. Inside, the chill of terror. But in this cold, a new glacial fire is born. The fire of revenge. She ceases to be a victim. She becomes a player. 2 days later, she does the impossible. She looks into the eyes of her traitor husband, Darnley, and she lies. She convinces him that he is the next victim of the conspirators, that only she can save him. She plays on his cowardice, on his stupidity, and he believes her. At night, while the guards are drunk, she, heavily pregnant, descends a rope ladder from a palace window. Together with her husband, the murderer, she flees. This is not an escape to freedom. It is a reprieve. She uses him to break out of the cage, but she will never forgive him. This escape is the beginning of the end. The chain of catastrophes has already been set in motion, and it cannot be stopped. Mary gives birth to a son, the future king. But even the birth of an heir cannot glue the broken world back together. Holyrood Palace is now, for her, a cursed place. A place where the air is steeped in the scent of blood and betrayal. Less than a year after Rizzio's murder, Edinburgh is shaken by an explosion. The house where Lord Darnley was being treated for syphilis is blown sky high. But Darnley himself is not found in the ruins. He is found in the garden, strangled, without a single burn mark. His body is brought back to Holyrood, to the place where he himself organized a massacre. He is laid out in the chapel, a monarch, killed like a dog. The palace becomes the stage for the final act of his worthless life, and everyone is watching Mary. She makes her primary, fatal mistake. 3 months after her husband's death, she marries the prime suspect in his murder, the Earl of Bothwell, a strong, brutal, ambitious warrior. Their wedding at Holyrood is not a celebration. It is the funeral of her reputation. The ceremony is performed according to Protestant rites, in silence, almost in secret. There is no music, no feast. The palace, which has seen so many triumphs, is now silent, as if ashamed of what is happening. It was her final act within these walls. The Scottish lords, the very same men who helped kill Rizzio, now rise against her, hiding behind the banner of vengeance for Darnley. Hypocrisy is the main engine of politics. She leaves Holyrood forever. She leaves to face an army of rebels, to lose her crown, to be locked in a castle on Loch Leven, to flee to England in search of aid, only to find there a 19-year imprisonment and the scaffold. The idol she tried to build within these walls is not just destroyed. It has been stabbed to death, with 57 blows, and every single one of them did not hit Rizzio. Every single one of them hit her. Holyrood was not her home. It became her tombstone. Kings depart. The stone remains, and slowly dies of loneliness. After Mary's son, James VI, inherited the English throne and moved to London, Holyrood fell empty. Its heart stopped beating. The corridors, accustomed to the whispers of conspirators and the rustle of silk dresses, now heard only the drafts. The staterooms, built for grand receptions, became storage for forgotten furniture. Dust, thick and gray, settled on the portraits, on the tapestries, on the thrones. The palace was turning into a ghost of itself. In the year 1650, new masters entered, the soldiers of Oliver Cromwell, an army of Puritans who despised the monarchy and its symbols. They did not burn the palace intentionally, like the army of Henry VIII. They simply lived in it, roughly, carelessly, without any reverence. One night, a stray spark from a soldier's fire or a candle fell in the wrong place. The wooden beams, dry with age, caught fire. The flames greedily crawled along the east wing, destroying everything the centuries had spared. A fire born of indifference proved no less destructive than a fire born of hatred. The palace fell into disrepair. No one healed its wounds. It became an uncomfortable reminder of lost power, of an independent Scotland that was no more. And then, Almost 100 years after the fire, in 1745, a short, desperate flash of life. The Jacobite army enters Edinburgh, and a young prince rides through the gates of Holyrood. Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie. He is the direct descendant of Mary Stuart, and he has come to reclaim the crown for his ancestors. For 6 weeks, the palace wakes up. The halls are filled with people once again. Music sounds, laughter, the jingle of spurs. The prince establishes his court at Holyrood. It is not just a military headquarters, it is a theater. He intentionally recreates the glamour of the past to convince the Scottish nobility that the Stuart monarchy is alive. The Great Gallery, where 111 ghostly kings look down from the walls, becomes a ballroom. Here, under their painted gazes, Prince Charlie and his supporters dance. Ladies in silk, lords in kilts. They spin in a final, desperate waltz. Their mistresses, their wives, everyone is here. They drink French wine to a king living in exile and believe they can turn back time. But this is agony disguised as a celebration. Beyond the palace walls, the English army is gathering. Every dance, every glass drained, is a moment stolen from inevitable catastrophe. Months later, on the moors of Culloden, their army will be annihilated. Many of those who danced in this gallery will lay their heads on the block or perish in exile. Their last happy evening was spent here. After the defeat of the Jacobites, the palace dies completely. It becomes a relic, barracks for soldiers, a shelter for impoverished French aristocrats fleeing their own revolution. When Queen Victoria arrives here in the 19th century, she finds it inconvenient and old-fashioned. She prefers to build her own cozy castle at Balmoral. Holyrood is no longer a home. It is a monument, a cold, majestic, unwanted stone keeping the echo of the last dance, a dance of ghosts on the edge of the abyss. What remains of the ambitions of kings, of their wars, their marriages, their paranoia? Stone. And history. But history itself is dead until someone is found to turn it into a legend. In the 19th century, such a man appears in Scotland, Sir Walter Scott, writer, romantic, marketing genius. He takes dusty chronicles and breathes life into them. His novels transform Mary Stuart from a failed queen into a tragic heroine, and Holyrood into the stage of her great drama. Something incredible happens. The palace, forgotten and abandoned, becomes a place of pilgrimage. Tourists, armed with Scots novels, flock here. They are not looking for architecture. They are looking for emotion. They want to see that room, that spot on the floor. The blood of David Rizzio, long gone, becomes Holyrood's main asset. Its tragedy begins to sell tickets. Its curse becomes its salvation. The ambitions of James V and Charles II are forgotten. Only Mary's story survives. Time passes. The world outside the palace windows changes. Opposite the ancient walls, on land that once belonged to the abbey, something unimaginable rises. The futuristic building of the Scottish Parliament. Glass, steel, concrete. A symbol of new, democratic power. Now they look at each other across the road. The old palace, born of the will of one man, and the new parliament, born of the will of millions. A silent, yet deafening dialogue. An argument about what true power is. The palace continues to play its role. It receives kings and queens, presidents and prime ministers. It is a stage for official ceremonies, for garden parties, for the awarding of honors. It becomes a symbol. But of what? The continuity of the monarchy, or the ability of the old world to adapt and survive in the new? And then, September 2022. something happens that closes the circle. Into the throne room, under plaster ceilings glorifying the divine right of kings, a coffin is carried. Inside, the body of Queen Elizabeth II. She died in Scotland, and her final journey begins here. The palace, which began as a symbol of the personal power of one king, becomes the stage for a national farewell. People stand in lines for hours to walk past the coffin. They are not just saying goodbye to a monarch. They are saying goodbye to an era. And in this moment, the final verdict of time becomes clear. Everything this palace was built for, the display of strength, the assertion of a dynasty, protection from enemies, all of it proved mortal. The gold is spent, the armies are defeated, the kings are long in their graves. Only one thing proved immortal: the great human tragedy that played out within its walls. Ambition turns to dust, but drama, frozen in stone, turns into eternity. Holyrood is not just a palace, it is proof that true legacy is not the crowns that are worn, but the scars that remain. We raise walls of stone to immortalize power and hide from fear. But time erases the names of kings from the facades, leaving as a legacy not triumph, but scars. A great human story that proves stronger than any foundation. What, then, is truly immortal? The stone that keeps the history, or the history itself, which does not even need the stone for eternity? Every such place has its own voice, and we have only just begun this conversation. Share your thoughts below, and if you want to continue hearing what the old walls are silent about, subscribe to the channel and support our story.